infrequent, it's not all day, it's unreliable.
Real problem in the US is what I would call transit deserts, right? I mean, these are just places where it is just complete and total nightmare to try to get anywhere on transit.
Without enough public transport choices, commuters in the US are forced to rely on their automobiles, which worsens the quality of the air, causes traffic, and produces more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Then why don't they have a more efficient public transport? Many years of car-centric planning and legislation, along with bad design and cost-cutting, as well as negative public opinion, are to blame. Let's see. In comparison to those in practically every comparable wealthy European and Asian nation, American buses, subways, and light rail lines consistently have lower ridership levels, fewer service hours, and longer waits between trains. At the same time, a far higher production of US public transport costs are covered by taxpayer money. In other words, we pay more for transit while receiving significantly less. It's the worst of all possible worlds. Many people attempt to explain this paradox by referencing US geography and history. After the 1950s, when the automobile emerged as a primary form of transportation, the majority of our cities and suburbs were developed. As a result, our metropolises are large, autocentric, and difficult for public transportation to service efficiently. This explanation, however, has a flaw. Canada. This country is likewise very huge and was primarily developed for the automobile. However, the public transport networks in Canadian cities are significantly dissimilar. Jarrett Walker, a transit specialist, claims that Canada just has more public transport. For example, compare Des Moines to Winnipeg, Salt Lake City to Edmonton, or Portland to Vancouver. Although they are both quite similar in terms of culture and economy, the Canadian city has between 2 and 5 times greater transportation service per resident, which results in higher usage per resident. Rich urbanites flocked to the multi-family mixed-use buildings in cities like Denver, Des Moines, Los Angeles, and Boston from 1890 to 1930, as streetcar suburbs grew in popularity. A streetcar station that would carry residents into the closest urban centre was within a 5 to 10 minute walk of the majority of the dwellings in these communities. Some argue that the terrain of the United States renders public transportation unworkable, but in reality, individuals are forced to drive due to the way our built environment has been designed. After World War II, the suburbs we know today were created thanks to vehicle culture and greater emphasis on single-family dwellings. For instance, suburban highways curving layouts were designed to reduce traffic. In the meantime, streetcar firms went out of businesses with little help from the government. Our urban regions are still expanding. Unchecked growth into uninhibited space comes at the price of expenditures on current facilities and infrastructure. As a result, people must travel even farther distances, which makes it more challenging to establish links for public transportation. For instance, the population of the Chicago area expanded by only 4% between 1970 and 1990, but the region's built-up land climbed by 46% according to Brookings. Many locals are consequently put in a precarious situation. Without a car, it's impossible to get to work, and without work, it's impossible to pay for a car. This is due to the rise in suburban poverty across the country. The cost of car ownership, meanwhile, is a significant hardship on the working poor. Some people use low ridership as an excuse to avoid making investments in public transport. However, people won't use transport if it doesn't make sense. One typical trip, which would take 20 minutes by vehicle and 60 minutes by public transport, is highlighted by the Brookings report in Chicago. According to Bloomberg, this subpar design is frequently accompanied by unpredictable service brought on by lack of upkeep. When the transit service that cities provide is not attractive, the demand from passengers that might justify its improvement will never materialise. In many cases, transit providers continue to lose customers and money by reducing essential services in an effort to save money. Public transport is viewed as necessary utility in many parts of the world, although it is typically treated as social assistance in the US. This is further supported by the observation that those who have no other option frequently take public transport that is in poor condition. These systems promote division since the general public doesn't find them useful. Budgets for public transport are generally decided by local governments and states rather than the federal government, and spending per capita varies greatly between states. The Urban Institute claims that current funding for transit operations is biased towards wealthier, more liberal communities. Other low-income communities are thus left without access to reliable and economical transport. The bad state of public transport in the United States is primarily due to lack of funding. Currently, the majority of the federal funding for transit services goes towards capital expenses. Creating the necessary infrastructure or purchasing the necessary cars. However, the transit services are truly being squeezed when it comes to operational expenses. Due to the fact that it is still not a successful industry, public transport relies substantially on subsidies. Consider the MTA, which is the country's largest public transportation system. Less than a quarter of the MTA's income in 2022 came from user fees. Comparatively, 40% of its overall income came from specialised taxes and grants from local governments. Over the last, 40 to 50 years, the cost of living, the cost of operations, the cost of development, all of that has well outpaced what is collected in fares. The cost just cannot be covered by the current subsidies. The pandemic had a significant negative financial impact on the MTA, necessitating short-term governmental assistance. However, it nonetheless disclosed a $1.9 billion budget deficit for 2022. This issue is not limited to New York City. By 2027, the SEPTA in Philadelphia expects to have a deficit of roughly $269 million. By 2026, the Chicago RTA plans to have a $730 million budget imbalance, while the Los Angeles Metro expects to have a $1 billion budget gap. Services decline as a direct result of these financial imbalances. We can limit the frequency of service, the length of the network, and the hours of operation if a transportation system is short on funds. But each of those factors discourages ridership and pushes people to rely more on their cars. Accurate and dependable arrival times came in second place to cheaper rates in a survey on public transport incentives conducted in 2022 among Americans who said that this would make them use public transport more frequently. The high operating costs of public transport in the US are a result of its low utilization. To be successful, public transit needs a population. Since 2015, there has been a steady fall in ridership. Additionally, ridership has not yet returned to its pre-pandemic levels after suffering a significant decline at that time. Do you realize it's a vicious circle? It is difficult to defend large public investment in that system if there are fewer customers and riders. Consequently, it has become more challenging to offer top-notch service. You will also continue to have a dearth of customers and riders because of your poor service. Users and riders must be included if the riders are either insufficient in number or do not pay a charge that covers those costs. Right, you have to make up that money in public subsidies if the passengers are either too few or don't charge a fare that does the job of covering those expenditures. Additionally, the funding mechanism for public transport in the United States is insufficient to adequately make up for the huge sum of money needed to fund operations and capital. But all Americans benefit from a strong public transport infrastructure. According to the American Public Transportation Association, roughly $42 billion of the 87% of transit-related spending that directly benefits the private sector each year benefits the local economy. It's estimated that investing in public transport will yield a $5 return on investment. Depoliticizing the topic and gaining public support can be accomplished in large part by forming local coalitions and highlighting the advantages of public transportation for communities. And that's a wrap for today's video. Give this video a big thumbs up and click the subscribe button below if you like what you watched. Make sure the notification bell is turned on so you won't miss any of our upcoming content.